The light was so bright and beautiful and powerful that it took me a minute to adjust and understand what was going on there too. As soon as I started to settle into it, I understood that it was heaven. I started to feel the light more and feel the energy of what that was. And I immediately felt this overwhelming sense of unconditional love. Love like I have never felt before. No matter what I had been through in my life, no matter what I had done, it was just complete love for me. I was bathing in it. It was wrapped around me, and it made me feel valued, appreciated, and accepted. The next thing I felt was an overwhelming sense of peace, that everything was okay and that everything was right, that all was well. I was getting a healing. I started to notice all the areas in my soul or in my energetic space where there were wounds or there were holes, and all of those areas were starting to get filled in, and they were getting filled in with love. I was being replenished, and it was the best feeling. It just made me feel like this is who I am. This is who I'm supposed to be. This is what my soul is all about. And as that was happening, I was also getting the sense that this white light that was all around me, that was taking such loving care of me, that I am that white light. I'm not separate from it. I just had the illusion that I had always been separate from it. And so while I was a part of it, I really sensed that separation being healed as well. I knew that I was dead. I knew that my physical body was no longer working and that I was no longer a part of it. And I was fine with it. It didn't scare me. It just felt like this is how it's meant to be. And it almost started feeling like my life was becoming a distant memory. It felt so much like home to be in that light that there was no other place I wanted to be at that point. There's no place that feels as good as that light feels.
And the only way I can describe it is there was an explosion, and everything from the known world kind of disappeared, and it felt like I was sitting in the sun, which may be a strange phrase, but I can't think of any other way to phrase it, and it just seems right. And when I say I, this I was not the body, this I was kind of a subtle personality. And the subtle personality itself was of the nature of a blaze. And so it was like what this identity was is something like a blaze within another blaze, or an aspect of a larger blaze. And in this experience, all the angst and all the questions disappeared, just vanished as if they never existed. And which is not to say I intellectually understood all the answers, but it felt as if there was a desire to understand intellectually any of these things, that it was all, possible at that point. So there was it was like the largest sigh of relief that one could imagine, in a sense. And this was simply it. It was just like a deep orangish kind of blaze, and just pure, I don't know, just being. It was just maybe like it was just so right, something like that.
In the instant of that click, I saw with a kind of clarity that I'd never understood before, that I was observing my body dying, but I wasn't dying. That I and my body were somehow two different things. That there was an observer aspect to my own being, my own consciousness, that was again, entirely, perfectly, clearly conscious and aware, and recognizing that the body was beginning to die. But just as with the same crystalline clarity, recognizing that that observing consciousness was not dying. And so it was, again, as if one way of saying it would be that myself, my I, and my body were two different things. And as a part of that recognition then, flooded in an extraordinary freedom, because what that meant in that moment was that the pain in that body was not mine. And so in that moment there was essentially a complete release from the suffering of the situation. It's the first time and it is not the last, it is the first time that I experienced the difference between pain and suffering. Because what I mean to say there is that the pain was not gone. It didn't leave. It didn't magically disappear. It was just recognized immediately and fully that it wasn't me, it wasn't mine, and that even though it was still there and recognizable as pain, I didn't need to be suffering from it. I wasn't suffering from it. There was a complete release in that way. But that still wasn't the end of the situation here. One of the other things that was immediately apparent in that moment was that that life force was draining away at a rate that was relatively slow. I was not going to keel over imminently. It was going to, the way it appeared in that moment was that I probably had a day and a half or two. And so again, there was this moment of just absolute freedom from the suffering, and the recognition that I got a little time. And so there was no sense of urgency in any way in that. There was really simply almost a sense of, this is so extraordinary, I'm so glad to have some time with it. The third sort of recognition, revelation, realization was that even that sense of an individuated but non-corporeal self was beginning to lose its individuality. And that sense of an individuated self, even if non-corporeal, was beginning to merge into what I, certainly at the time, could not possibly have put into words, which was merging into what was absolutely vast, what was absolutely overwhelmingly all. It begins difficult to put it into words without sounding either very poetic or very religious. And I actually kind of love all the words that we have for it. And this too was happening at a rate that was kind of slow at first, because it was in exact lockstep with the rate at which that life force was leaving, was the exact rate at which there was this merging with the vastness, merging with the divine, merging with what is absolutely, overwhelmingly all.
And I just wasn't in the body anymore. There was just no body. It was like the top of my SUV was gone, and I was above, looking at this thing beneath me, and that's how it felt. This body felt like a thing. There was no attachment to it. There wasn't even a sadness for it. There was no, holy heck, we got to get her help or anything. There was just no thought, just more curiosity, like, just this, I'm not anything, and I'm not that. And there wasn't even a questioner of why is this happening or who is this happening to. It was just complete, utter awareness of experience is the way I describe it. I wasn't in pain. I wasn't hurting. I wasn't sick or nauseous. I wasn't scared. I felt no fear. I didn't feel guilt or remorse or regret. All of those things that we seem to be comprised of in this human realm, none of that was happening. It was just, I was it. The sensation of all of it. And it felt like an expansion. It felt like this tuna can I had been in had popped open, and this energy could just expand beyond anything that I'd ever known. There was no body again. There was no, I'm an arm, or I'm a leg, or I'm an eyeball, or any of that. It was just, just this expansion into this beauty and this love I've never experienced.
They knew that I was dying, and I was able to see what they were doing, and I allowed it. I was almost so detached, and I got out of my body, followed the ambulance to the hospital, and I tuned out until they got my body on the gurney and they started taking me to surgery and tried to revive me. All I remember is being on my deathbed. Tubes in and out of me, them saying my lung is collapsed, I've lost too much blood. There's shards of glass behind my neck, in my head. They don't know if I'm gonna survive. And at that moment, that's when I realized that there's something more to me. Because if my body is dead, but I'm having these abilities to come out of my body and I can leave and I can see what's going on, that's not make-believe. What can I do with that? I started to notice that after a couple hours after my surgeries, and they had me on life support. Eventually my mom shows up, my sister shows up, and family's being called overseas. I was able to remote view anywhere that I desired. I was able to enter consciousness and be in alignment with people's frequency and thoughts and feelings and emotions. I was able to hear what they were thinking, not what they were saying. I was able to hear people praying for me. And I was able to hear my mom's thoughts as she's ringing and waiting for someone to come on the phone before she would speak it. Then she would speak it, and then I would sense the frequency go to the next person through the telephone wires. I was able to consciously connect to frequencies. And I was able to go to, for example, my uncle. He was on his way to a vacation with his children. And when my mom called him, he had to make an abrupt stop and tell everybody in the car that we got to turn around and we got to go. Malcolm's on life support. And I was able to sense feelings, and I sensed what my cousins felt, and they didn't really care. They wanted to go on their vacation. My uncle, on the other hand, he was following a duty to do what he needed to do. So I was able to come and go in and out of my body at will. I was able to travel around the hospital, and see different families coming and going, and people coming and whispering into my ear. I could be at all places at once. And people who ask, was it a dream? Was it a vision? Was it just a thought? Were you awake and you were squinting, or you were aware? I challenged it myself. But when I woke up from my life support, I told each and every person what they had thought of me, what they prayed for me, and what they spoke to everybody on the phones. So that's what made it real for me, was when I came back and I told everybody what their thoughts were and what they were sending and what they were thinking and feeling. And they just were stone cold. They didn't know how to perceive it, what to say. But I would say, what's wrong? They said, that's true. I just don't know what to say. How do you know that?
I don't know how much time had passed since my next experience, but the next thing I remember, I was floating above the trees, but it wasn't like an astral body experience. It was an awareness of who I was, and it was a very familiar awareness of who I was, but it was like eyes looking out. It was like, I explain it like a ball of energy, but I can't even say that it was a ball of energy. So I was floating above the trees, the redwood trees, maybe just right above them and around them. And there was this peace, this just incredible, serene peace, no thoughts, a connection and awareness of total silence. And I stopped for a minute, and well, this part of me stopped for a minute and just examined my senses. My senses seemed to be very much alive at this point. I could see extreme detail of the redwood trees around me, the dewdrops on the needles. I could hear dogs bark miles away, birds. I could even hear the ocean and sense the ocean, which is about 5 to 10 miles away from where I was. And so I was I could feel the wind blowing through me. It was just an incredible experience. And then I was like, well, where am I? What am I doing? And I looked down at my body and I saw my body there, and it was kind of wrapped up. I looked very much dead. And it was kind of like a microvision, seeing my body and then zooming back up.
We've spent all this time thinking about how smart we are when we don't even realize there is a consciousness that can work beyond the intelligence that most of us use. There's intuition and it's real. So immediately I just felt like the brain was a limiter of experience, and that outside of body, I was just picking up on what it's like to live in a realm without time, what it's like to travel at the speed of light, what it's like to experience some of the mysteries beyond this life. Like, this life felt limited. My body felt limited, and that experience felt expansive. And the first thing I remember is, when you're outside of surgery, they ask you your name, and my throat felt dry. But I had read about near-death experiences, so I knew what happened to me. And I also knew that I wasn't just in my body. Like, this massive experience had just happened, and I was having trouble feeling like all of me was in my body. My energy was expanded. And so I thought of myself in third person. They asked me several times, what's your name? And I said, her name is Tricia. I guess I have to come back and be her, but in my mind, I was like, I'm so much more, like, I'm not just this physical body. I'm a consciousness that touched something so much more than this particular body. And I was kind of sad to be in this broken body, to know that all those emotional wounds were healed in the presence of God, but now I still have to get along with these family members, and I still have to process what happened in my life. And I remember some sadness about having to come back to being me, because it was a lot more fun to be connected to God and connected to everyone.
And I was told to look to my right and left, and I did, and I saw several souls who were just illuminated and sparkling their auras on the terrain, which was all diamond-like and crystal, beautiful white, shimmering rainbow colors as well, because of the light from the orb on the ground. At one point, I looked down and I could see that I was shimmering, and it was the first time I realized that I was worth something to this great source who had come to meet me. Even if it was just the glisten of the eye of God, I was so in gratitude, and I wanted to stay. The love was overwhelming, but I wasn't moving. I had 4 relatives to my right and to my left, maternal grandmother, paternal family, grandmother and family here. And I asked the orb again, maybe you didn't hear me. And I thought it didn't like the word, I was a bad person, you can judge me now. So I better change my wording and say, I was not a good person, so you can judge me now. And all it did was give me more love. And then a second light came out of that bright, luminous white. And that white luminous dimmed just a little bit, which is what God does for us. God just takes a step back and allows us to be the skyscraper architects and the bridge builders and the rocket ship makers and all these things that we think we are as human beings.
The next thing I know, I'm standing in a beautiful light, and everything, absolutely everything has changed. I am happy. I feel free. I'm joyous that this has happened. I don't understand it, but I'm standing in an ocean of golden white waves, this light with crystalline drops everywhere like diamonds floating in the air. And far into the distance, I see this magnificent waterfall. And I want to move toward the waterfall, and I have my eyes open and I'm walking toward it, and I'm told to close my physical eyes because it was so blinding bright that I couldn't see well. And when I closed my physical eyes, oddly enough, it was like putting on a pair of sunglasses. Suddenly I can see everything, and I can see it all very clearly, and it's unbelievably beautiful. But far beyond that are the feelings that I have. As the waves came toward me, they didn't hit me, they went right through my body. And as they went through my body, they washed away any of the negative emotions that I might ever have felt. So it was as if nothing bad has ever happened. I am completely joyous. I know that I'm absolutely loved. Life is more beautiful than I ever imagined, and this is the life that I want forever. I know that I'm alive, and I don't want to go back to my body. I now know that I have an identity that is completely separate from the body, and that this is the real me, that I am soul, this beingness, and I am in absolute bliss. The joy, the experience was so fulfilling, so deeply gratifying, and I committed my life to that, to following the inner guidance, to listening, to be aware that heaven is present here and now, that God is with us at all times, and the universe is speaking to us at all times, and drop the preposterous beliefs of my childhood that wouldn't allow for such a thing to have occurred, that you would see God and know God and be able to experience the divine without dying and going to heaven, and that it doesn't matter what your religion is, that we're all beautiful souls. We're divine, we're beautiful, we're aware, we're capable, we are everything we might ever want to be already. We are that, and we simply need to recognize it, be aware of it.
And I'm looking down at my physical body, and even though it's been a couple of years or a few years of processing this, this is still by far the most profound takeaway that I have from my entire experience. And when I was looking down at my physical body, I said to myself, what am I doing up here? I didn't say, what am I doing down there? And on the surface, that seems like a pretty logical question to ask. It really is one I think anybody would ask. But what I realized in that moment was that by asking that question, I wasn't asking the question of what was I doing down there where my physical body was. I was asking the question of what am I doing up here? That means the I that I was identifying with was not my physical body. It was the part of me that was in the ceiling that, again, just for the sake of simplicity, I'll call it the soul. And that was the part that I identified with. That was the I am that I understood to be who I actually am.
There was a sense of complete ease, complete, and I'd never been so alive in my life, and you know, I was very, I suppose, non-local. I wouldn't have known that word back then, but there was a sense of, you know, being totally in my body, but also in the car and also in the sky outside, and everywhere in my visual field, I had a sense that that was essentially me. I was the whole thing. I wouldn't have used the word me because at that time the word me really meant that, you know, the little narrator behind the head. But there was a sense of, there's a sense of being the totality and total complete peace, and a sense of you know, basically that everything had been the whole time made up of love, or you know, something just as fundamental that I didn't have a word for. That my whole life had been this beautiful, perfect play.
I was just being drawn to the light very slowly, and during this time there was no verbal communication, but I felt the sense of total love, total peace. I had no physical feeling of any body, of having a body. I didn't feel like the sense of clothes touching my body. It was just like having my consciousness without having a body attached to it. It was just total relaxation that you don't experience here on Earth. And I felt this just clean, being forgiven, and a cleaning of my soul.
With that prayer, I lifted up out of my body. And the amazing thing, I realized I wasn't in the body, but I was still me. I was still, aware and having thoughts. And also I was free of that horrible pain. I was in this perfect body, like an ethereal copy of my own. And I was just, it was just amazing because my vision was perfect. Everything about my, there was no head injury. I had scraped my hand. There was nothing. Everything was perfect.
So I looked down the front of me like this, and I could see my hair down the front of me. I could see my shirt, my pants, my feet. And I was like, I've still got a body, but it was a light body. It wasn't heavy and weighed down by gravity. Doesn't feel like the kind of bodies that we have, like how you feel, how I feel, which is, heavy. And, it didn't feel like that. It felt as light as a feather. And I glowed like everybody else was glowing, and it was like, oh my goodness. And I felt beautiful. For the first time, I felt beautiful. And I felt cared about and loved and accepted. Well, one of the things that I learned at that point is that I still looked like me. I still felt like me. I still thought like me. I was still me. The only thing that died was my physical body. I am not my physical body. You are not yours. We are souls that have spirits. And that is the part of us that lives forever. That is not going to go away. That is not going to die. Your physical body will, but you will still be you. You will still think the way you think. You will still feel like you. You will look like you, only better.
To me, it felt very, very real. In fact, it felt more real than this physical reality. It was as if my awareness was expanding more and more, like going through different levels, because after a while, I started to leave this physical level. And when we leave our physical body, we leave behind everything that's associated with our body, our biology, our voice, our race, our religion. All of that gets left behind. And what crosses over is just pure essence, pure spirit, or pure love. We can call it whatever we want.
Really, really easy. I found it the easiest thing in the world to die. I was having a lot of trouble breathing. For the last several hours, all I was doing was trying to breathe. I had enough sense to know that if you stop breathing, that would be a bad thing. All I had to do was just stop doing that, and I went unconscious. Awoke, I was standing there. I felt absolutely physically more real, more alive, and completely healed than I'd ever been in my life. So the first thing I did was I did a reality check, which consisted of taking my hands, and I felt myself from the top of my head, felt myself all the way down, right down to my feet. And it's like feeling good. Matter of fact, feeling really good. So then I started to do a sensory check. I know it sounds very rational, but I was a very rational person. I can hear the hum of the fluorescent lights in the ceiling, hear them humming really loudly. And then I looked and I realized that in our, I was an art teacher. So like in our vision, we see 180 degrees if you have two eyes. Well, I was seeing way more than 180 degrees. And I'm going, ooh, that's so weird. And then I checked my depth of field, which is You know, like if you focus on something far, your near is out of focus and vice versa. I was going like, I have complete depth of field. I mean, I am focused on everything.
And when I came back into the body, I had to lose some of that consciousness and come back into a limited consciousness, which we exist in here. And most of that consciousness annihilates as you come in, and you might see sparklers or flames. I saw flames. PHM Atwater sees sparklers. And a lot of people believe that's the consciousness annihilating, because it has to get smaller to fit into the physics of this reality in this body, which is very dense. And I remember very clearly slamming back into it, and the colors of red coming down over the white light, like a liquid, like tendrils of tie-dyed batik or something, just coming down and then just coming down like that and closing it off.
So I hear I've had all of this, and I'm thinking, I'm going to start telling my story. I'm going to start telling people. I'm going to start talking at churches. People need to know this, that God really does love us and that he made us on purpose. And I remember when I was over there with him, we were like back in time, and I could see the moment when he thought me up. And I was like, how did I forget that I was with you before I was ever here? That you made me. I existed in your mind first. And it just was such a great thing to know, because I'd always felt so separate from God, like God was this separate entity. And God showed me, as we were going through my DNA, we stopped at that point, and he's like, do you see me? I'm like, well, of course I see you. You're all around me. And he's like, no. And he pointed to this spot in my genetic code. He's like, do you see me? And I looked, and I was blown away. I was like, oh my gosh. It still gets me. Oh my gosh. And he said, Penny, a person can deny that their father is their father, but we can always come back to this and prove that he is their father. So they can say what they want, but I'm here. I'm in you. All this time, I feel like I've been searching for this distant God when part of him is in me, just like part of your mom and part of your dad are in your DNA. That doesn't make you God. It doesn't make you your mom or dad. But the creator of the universe is embedded in your genetic code. Part of him is in there. It's just amazing. And I just never thought of that. And it really made me question everything in life, like all of the crap I'd believed about myself and all the stuff I'd believed about the world and all the stuff I was willing to put up with. And I just started questioning everything about my faith.
I knew quickly that I was out of my body, and I wasn't afraid at all, actually. There was no fear. It was almost like a very soothing, soft, kind of velvety blackness is the only way I can describe it. It was comforting. And I kind of knew that I would not be here for long. And I thought, well, where am I anyway? And then the thought occurred to me that I was probably dead. And what do all good nurses do when there's something they want to investigate? They do an assessment. And so I actually quickly did the body check. I kind of felt for my arms and my legs and my body and my head. And I was like, okay, no arms, no legs, check, no head. You're definitely out of your body. And I remember being totally fascinated by that, thinking, okay, you really have died. I don't know how this happened, and I really didn't care, actually. I was feeling pretty great, and I still felt like myself. Out of my body, I was just pure awareness. I was slightly aware at that point that there was sort of a light body, is the only way I just could describe it, that there was some light coming from me, although it wasn't very prominent at that point.
Look at your mind, watch how it functions, and you will note that there's this essence, this I thing inside yourself. It's the conductor of your internal orchestra. It's the person waving the baton, making the music, making all your reactions. It's latching onto things, getting excited over them, becoming averse to them. All of these reactions are simply because you don't look at the nature of this thing that you call I. We all glibly say, I'm going to the bathroom, I'm going to the beach, I like this, I don't like that. And we don't look at this central thing called I, which is claiming authority, which is claiming occupancy of the body, and look at it to the point where you understand that it's just a framing mechanism. All the stuff that comes in, the thoughts, the ideas, the perceptions, they come in and they get processed in such a way that makes you think, I am this person. I have to choose and decide what to do next. So if you want to stop being affected or overwhelmed by all the things that the game produces, have a look. Isolate this thing called I inside yourself. Watch it, hold on to it, watch it go back to its source and disappear, and then you find the peace, the stillness in which suffering can't arise at all.
And of course, once you accept near-death experiences, you accept that life goes on, that there is no death. I mean, I've heard thousands of stories of people talking about at the point of their body's death, their spirit just sits up or rises up and keeps going. Sometimes it stops a little bit at the ceiling. Sometimes it goes into a tunnel before it goes into the light. Sometimes as soon as you're out of your body, you're just in the light. A lot of variability, but a lot of the same themes. The bottom line is we're eternal. We don't die when our body dies. So, what does this lead us to have to consider about ourselves if we're eternal souls? Well, we hear we're created in the image and likeness of God, but what does that mean? I've come to believe for myself it has nothing to do with our physical appearance. It has to do with our soul that is within us and the love that we are. God is love, and I believe that we are created as love as well. But who am I? I think I'm more than just what's being expressed in this one lifetime. I feel so much bigger and grander than the person that I am. Now, I go by Ann Ellis. In this lifetime, I've gone by a few other names too, but that's what I go by right now. But when I think about who I am, I don't feel like I'm Ann. I feel like I'm the soul. I'm a soul that's here as Ann in this lifetime. So now I say I'm just occupying Ann. You know, I love her, I appreciate her, and I know she's doing the best she can. And God bless her, you know. She's not perfect, and maybe my soul isn't perfect. I don't know the answer to that, but I believe that I'm here to learn many things, not just to learn how to be a better person. And recently, I was reading a book and it said, just meditate on your soul. You can ask your soul any questions you want. So I just meditated on to contact my eternal soul, wherever it is. See, I think it's bigger than just in my body. I think maybe part of it is still over there. I don't really know that, my higher self. But my soul is so much more connected to that side, to the rest of the invisible world, than my body is able to receive. But by meditating on my eternal soul, I could feel something very powerful within me, and I felt like I was touching something beyond. So today, I'm just going to think about what are some of the ramifications of being an eternal soul, an eternal being. And one of the things that's hard about contemplating being eternal is grasping that means there's no beginning and there's no end. You know, it's one thing to accept there's no end, but there was no beginning. I mean, part of my concept is that God created all these souls out of God's self. God created everything out of God's self, and that the souls come into being in these nebulas out in the universe, maybe. But that souls would have a beginning that way, but maybe God had no beginning. Maybe there, you know, it's the definition of time on that side. There is no time, so if there's no time, then by definition there's no beginning or end.